The rain had just stopped when the old woman found it, small, trembling, and half buried in the mud outside her bamboo gate. Its skin shimmered like wet stone, its eyes wide and unafraid. She thought it was just another lizard washed down from the forest hill, weak and hungry. Without hesitation, she scooped it up with her wrinkled hands, whispering softly, as if speaking to a lost child. That single act, simple and kind, would change both their lives forever. Her neighbors laughed when they saw her feeding the creature rice and insects in a clay bowl. That thing belongs in the wild, they said. But the old woman only smiled, her gray hair glinting in the morning light. She had no one left, no husband, no children, only the quiet rhythm of her days. The small reptile filled that silence with the sound of breathing, of movement, of life. So she kept it close, naming it Raka. After the dawn she found it. Days became months. The lizard grew, faster, larger, stronger than she ever imagined. Its scales darkened, its eyes sharpened, and its presence began to command the yard like a silent guardian. Some nights she would wake to find Raka standing near her window, watching the forest as if remembering something ancient. In that gaze, she saw not a pet, but a being older and wiser than herself. And though she didn't yet know it, the creature she loved was no mere lizard. It was a Komodo dragon. Morning sunlight spilled over the small village, painting the rooftops gold. The grandmother, called Nenek by all, sat on her porch weaving baskets. Raka rested nearby, his scaly belly pressed against the cool earth. The villagers still whispered, half in curiosity, half in fear, about the creature she kept. But to Nenek, he was simply company, a living thing that listened when the wind would not. Each day began with a bowl of rice and a word of gratitude. Sometimes she talked to him as if he were her late husband. "You're quiet like him," she'd say, laughing softly. Raka would tilt his head, blinking slowly as though understanding. The rhythm of their days grew gentle and sure, marked by the sounds of chickens and the rustle of leaves. At dusk, they'd sit by the old well and watch the sun bleed into the sea. For the first time in years, Nenek didn't feel alone. By midsummer, Raka had doubled in size. His tongue flicked like a blade of lightning, and his tail could sweep dust into storms. Children stopped playing near Nenek's house, afraid of the growing monster. Some men urged her to release it into the forest before it turned on her. But she refused, shaking her head firmly. "He's my family now," she said, voice trembling but sure. "He will not harm what loves him." Raka began to follow her everywhere, to the garden, to the river, even to the small shrine by the banyan tree. Villagers watched, uneasy yet fascinated, as the massive reptile trailed behind the frail woman like a loyal dog. One night, someone threw stones at her fence, shouting warnings about danger. Raka rose, his chest heaving, eyes glowing in the moonlight. The stones stopped coming. The whispers never did. The rains returned early that year. Water turned the fields into mirrors, and frogs sang until dawn. Nenek struggled to carry firewood through the mud, her legs weaker than before. Raka would walk beside her, his body shielding her from the wind, his presence a silent promise of safety. Sometimes she'd rest her hand on his scaled back, whispering, "You're strong enough for both of us now." One evening, she noticed footprints, large, clawed, around the chicken coop. Raka smelled the air and hissed low. Something wild had come near. That night, a boar crept close, but before it reached the yard, Raka struck. The sound was terrible, one swift, primal act. When morning came, only silence remained. Nenek buried what was left of the boar and looked at Raka differently, not with fear, but awe. Time moved like a slow river. Nenek no longer spoke to many people. Her world had narrowed to her garden, her porch, and the steady rhythm of Raka's breathing. They ate together, rested together, dreamed together. When she sang old lullabies from her childhood, Raka would close his eyes, head low, as though the melody soothed something ancient inside him. Their bond was beyond words, a meeting of spirits, not species. But the world outside did not forget them. A traveler once came through, seeing the enormous creature sunbathing in the yard. "That's no pet," he gasped. "That's a Komodo." News spread quickly, drawing curious eyes. Yet when people came to see, Raka hid behind Nenek's house, unwilling to be displayed. He was not a beast for spectacle. He was hers, and she was his. Weeks later, a young forest ranger arrived. He bowed respectfully, then spoke with concern. "Nenek, Komodo dragons belong to the wild. Keeping one is dangerous, for you and for him." She listened quietly, eyes soft with age. "Then the wild has already found me," she replied, "and it has chosen to stay." The ranger sighed, leaving behind a pamphlet about wildlife protection that she never read. That night, she told Raka about the ranger's words. "They think you should leave," she said, brushing leaves off his back. "But I think you were meant to be here." Raka blinked once, slow and calm. Somewhere in the forest, thunder rumbled like distant drums. It felt as though nature itself was listening to their conversation, weighing love against instinct. Winter winds brought more than cold. They brought weakness. Nenek began coughing often, her voice turning thin as paper. She hid it at first, forcing smiles when Raka looked her way. But one morning, she couldn't stand. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, eyes half closed. Raka lay close beside her, warmth radiating through his massive body, trying to share his strength. She whispered, "Don't worry, old one. I'll be fine." But even Raka seemed to sense the lie. He followed her every step that week, refusing to eat unless she did. When she finally collapsed in the garden, he let out a low, mournful sound that echoed through the valley. Birds took flight. The forest went silent. Something sacred was shifting. The village healer came, carrying herbs and concern. "She's old, and her spirit's tired," he murmured. He gave her tea, prayed softly, and told the villagers to watch over her. But none dared come near with Raka guarding the gate. The Komodo's eyes followed every movement, his breath deep and slow. The healer left quickly, whispering, "That creature mourns already." That night, Nenek reached out a trembling hand and touched Raka's snout. "If I go first," she said, voice breaking, "promise me you'll stay. Protect this home. Let the trees remember us." Raka lowered his head into her lap. In that gesture was an unspoken vow. The moon rose, pale and thin, casting light on two souls bound by love stronger than fear. At dawn, the rooster didn't crow. The air was still, heavy. Nenek sat on her porch, facing the mountains, eyes distant but peaceful. Raka rested near her feet, unmoving, his breath shallow. She smiled faintly, whispering, "You can go back to the wild now, Raka. I'll watch from the wind." A tear slipped down her cheek as she closed her eyes for the last time. Hours passed before Raka realized she would not wake again. He nudged her hand gently, then again, more urgently. When she didn't stir, he let out a deep, guttural cry that shook the bamboo walls. Villagers came running, but stopped at the gate. The great Komodo stood over her body like a guardian carved from stone. None dared approach. Days turned into nights. Raka did not eat, did not move far from her porch. Rain soaked his scales, but he stayed. The villagers whispered of a haunting, how the Komodo refused to leave, how he stared toward the mountains as if waiting for her return. Children left offerings of food near the fence, and sometimes they swore they saw tears glimmer in his eyes. Finally, when the air grew still and cicadas fell silent, Raka began to dig. Claws that once tore prey now moved with gentleness. He dug beneath the old banyan tree where she once prayed. When the grave was ready, he lay beside it for 3 days, unmoving. On the third night, the wind rose, carrying the faint sound of her lullaby through the leaves. Raka lifted his head toward the stars. Years passed, the house decayed, the fence fell, and the garden turned wild again. But Raka remained, older, slower, his scales dull but his eyes unchanged. Travelers who crossed the valley told tales of a giant lizard guarding a forgotten home, never leaving its porch. Some said he was cursed, others said he was loyal beyond death. No one knew the truth. When storms rolled across the land, villagers sometimes saw him standing beneath the banyan tree, still as stone. They said he was waiting for the woman with gray hair and a gentle voice who once called him Raka, who once gave him love without fear. And though she was gone, her spirit lived in the creature's watchful heart. The wild had not taken him. Love had made him stay. The seasons turned, and grass reclaimed the path to Nenek's home. Raka watched each sunrise from the same spot, his eyes tracing the horizon she once loved. Birds nested in the roof beams above him, unafraid. To the forest, he had become part of it, motionless, ancient, eternal. Yet inside that hulking form was a memory that refused to fade. Her laughter, her songs, her touch, all lingered like echoes between breaths. The villagers learned to live around him. Children grew up hearing his story, calling him Penjaga Nenek, the grandmother's guardian. Offerings of fruit and flowers appeared by the fence, left in quiet respect. Raka never touched them, only watched. His world had narrowed to a single promise: to keep her home safe until time itself forgot her name. One night, the sky cracked open. Thunder rolled down from the mountains like the growl of some forgotten god. Rain fell in sheets, flooding the valley. Lightning struck the banyan tree, splintering its trunk. Raka moved for the first time in days, pressing his body against the tree as if to shield it. Water roared through the yard, tearing at the soil where Nenek rested. With every crash of thunder, Raka's instincts screamed to run, to seek higher ground. But he stayed. He dug his claws into the earth, anchoring himself beside her grave. When the storm finally passed, half the tree was gone, but the grave was untouched. In the silence that followed, Raka lifted his head toward the clearing sky, and for the first time, he roared, not in anger, but in defiance. Years later, travelers arrived from the city. Scientists, explorers, camera crews. They came chasing rumors of a giant Komodo that lived among humans. They found the ruins of Nenek's home and the creature that waited there still. Cameras clicked, drones buzzed, and lights flashed. Raka didn't move, but his eyes, ancient and knowing, met theirs, and one by one they lowered their equipment, silenced by something sacred. Among them was a young woman who reminded everyone of Nenek. Gray scarf, gentle eyes. She knelt before Raka and whispered, "You stayed." He blinked slowly as if recognizing her kindness. The others left, but she remained for a time, cleaning the porch, lighting incense by the grave. When she finally departed, she bowed deeply. "Rest well, old one," she said. Raka watched her until she vanished beyond the trees. Decades turned into something else, time without meaning. Raka grew slower, heavier, his scales thick with dust. Vines crept up the walls, and moss spread across his tail. Still he stayed, always near the grave, always watching the forest line. Some nights, he would lift his head to the wind and let out a deep hum, as though calling for someone long gone. The sound carried across valleys like a heartbeat echoing through stone. No one dared disturb him. The house became a shrine, known only to those who sought stories of love and loyalty. Travelers lit candles by the gate, whispering prayers. Some claimed they saw an old woman's spirit walking beside the Komodo in the moonlight. Others said it was just the wind. Either way, the legend of Nenek and Raka spread beyond the island, told wherever people needed to remember that love could outlast life. One summer, a boy from the village wandered into the overgrown yard. He had heard the tales and wanted to see the beast himself. When he saw Raka lying by the banyan stump, he froze, but the old dragon did not move. Only his eyes shifted, slow and patient. The boy crept closer, and placed a mango before him. "For you," he whispered. Raka blinked once, and something in that gaze made the boy smile. He began visiting every day, sweeping the porch, clearing weeds, talking softly about his life. Raka would watch, silent and still, like a guardian listening to confession. The boy named him Datuk Raka, the elder. Under his care, the place began to breathe again. Flowers returned, vines were trimmed, and for a while, the spirit of the old home stirred. It was as if Nenek's warmth had found a new vessel in the child. One dusk, as fireflies filled the air, the boy heard something, soft, like humming. It came from the banyan stump. He turned and saw a faint shape, silver and pale, standing beside Raka. It was a woman, hair long and gray, eyes kind and endless. The boy rubbed his eyes, but the figure didn't vanish. She looked down at him, smiling. "Thank you for keeping him company," she whispered, voice like rain. Raka raised his head slightly, sensing her. For a moment, the years fell away. The forest, the decay, the silence. The two souls who once shared a life met again in the fading light. The boy stepped back, heart pounding. Then, just as suddenly, the figure dissolved into wind. Raka closed his eyes and rested his head against the earth. The boy understood then. He wasn't alone in caring for this place. As age pressed heavier upon him, Raka's movements grew slow, yet one evening, the forest stirred with danger. A pack of wild dogs, lean and hungry, drawn by the scent of chickens. The boy shouted, but Raka was already moving, slow yet deliberate. With a burst of strength long thought lost, he charged, scattering the pack. The dogs fled into the night, tails tucked. Raka returned, limping but victorious. He lay down by the porch, breath ragged, blood trickling from a shallow wound. The boy wept, washing the cut with trembling hands. "You saved me," he whispered. Raka's eyes softened. For a moment, in the boy's face, he saw the kindness of the woman who once fed him rice by hand. As darkness fell, they sat together in silence. The last guardian, the new keeper, watching the stars ignite the sky. That winter, Raka stopped eating. The boy brought food, fresh water, even fish from the river. But Raka only watched the horizon. His breath grew shallow, his eyes half closed, as though listening to something only he could hear. The boy stayed beside him, whispering prayers he had learned from the old tales. The forest was silent, waiting. When the moon rose full, Raka lifted his head one final time toward the banyan stump. He let out a low, trembling rumble that rolled through the valley like thunder. Then he lay his head down gently beside the grave, scales glistening under silver light. The boy held his hand to the Komodo's chest and felt it still. The forest sighed, and somewhere, far, far away, the wind carried a woman's voice singing an old lullaby. At dawn, the villagers came. They found the boy sitting beside the still form of the Komodo, his eyes red but calm. Together, they buried Raka beside Nenek, under the banyan tree that had regrown from its roots. The villagers built a small shrine of stone, simple yet beautiful, with carvings of a woman and a dragon side by side. They named the place Desa Penjaga, the guardian's village. Word of the story spread. Pilgrims came from distant islands, leaving offerings, whispering prayers for loyalty, protection, and love. The villagers never forgot the lesson the two had taught, that friendship can bridge all boundaries, even between human and beast. At night, some swore they saw shadows, two figures walking together under the moonlight, their steps in perfect rhythm. Years later, the boy, now a grown man, stood before the shrine. Children played nearby, laughing, their voices carrying across the hills. He knelt and placed a single flower between the two carved figures. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing us what love means." The morning sun rose, casting golden light through the trees, illuminating both graves. The air felt alive with memory. And then, for the briefest moment, he heard it, a soft hiss, familiar and gentle, like a breath carried by time. The leaves stirred, though no wind blew. Somewhere deep in the forest, the call of a Komodo echoed faintly, long and low. The man smiled through his tears. The legend lived on, not in the stones or the stories, but in the heart of everyone who still believed that love, once given, never truly leaves. Decades after Raka's passing, the shrine stood firm beneath the growing banyan tree. Moss covered the carvings, but the faces of the woman and dragon remained clear, as if time refused to touch them. The villagers still lit incense each morning, letting the smoke curl upward like prayer. Travelers came from far islands, drawn by stories of a grandmother who loved a beast without fear. Each visitor left believing something sacred lingered there. At night, the wind would pass through the branches, producing a strange harmony, half whisper, half hum. Some said it was the forest breathing. Others swore they heard two voices blending in song. The elders smiled and told the young, "That is Nenek and Raka speaking to each other still." The children would listen, wide-eyed, to the music of devotion that never died. One day, a scholar from the mainland arrived, curious to find truth behind the legend. He carried notebooks, cameras, and skepticism in equal measure. The villagers welcomed him, sharing their stories over tea and laughter. He stayed near the shrine, sketching the carvings, studying the soil where the graves lay. Yet as the days passed, he began to dream of scales gleaming under sunlight, of a gentle hand stroking a wild creature's head. He wrote in his journal, "Science can measure bones but not loyalty. What lives here is older than proof." On his final morning, he stood before the banyan tree, hearing that faint hum in the wind. Closing his eyes, he whispered, "If you're still here, thank you for teaching us what being human means." When he left, he took nothing but stories, and left behind belief. Years later, a child was born in the village during a fierce storm. Lightning struck thrice that night, once near the shrine, once by the well, and once in the forest beyond. The elders called her Rani, meaning sky's gift. As she grew, she often wandered to the shrine, drawn by something she couldn't explain. While others feared the dark, she would sit there alone, whispering, "Tell me your story." One evening, she found a smooth black scale buried in the earth beside the banyan roots. She held it close, feeling warmth pulse through it like a heartbeat. From that day, she began dreaming of the grandmother, of Raka, of wind and rain and song. The villagers said she was chosen. Rani only smiled and said, "I think they're watching me." As years rolled forward, the forest began reclaiming what humans had taken. The air grew thick with the scent of rain and earth. Wild animals returned, boars, deer, and smaller lizards creeping through undergrowth. Rani loved to walk among them, whispering words she didn't fully understand. The creatures never fled from her. Even the birds seemed to follow her steps. The shrine became hidden beneath vines and flowers, as though nature wanted to protect it. Only Rani and a few villagers still came to clear the leaves, leaving offerings of rice and fruit. "It's how we keep their memory alive," said her grandmother. "Every act of kindness feeds their spirits." And in the stillness after sunset, Rani would swear she heard footsteps beside her, soft, heavy, familiar. One evening, as the monsoon poured down, Rani sought shelter beneath the banyan tree. Lightning lit the yard, and for a moment she saw them, two shapes in the rain. The woman's hair flowed like mist. The dragon's scales shimmered silver. They stood side by side, watching her with eyes full of calm and warmth. Rani froze, heart pounding, but felt no fear, only peace. The figures faded as the rain softened, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind. She wept, not from fright, but from awe. She understood then that they were not gone, not entirely. The love that bound them had soaked into the land, into the rain, into every breath of wind that touched the island. She carried that knowing with her always, like a quiet fire inside. As Rani grew older, she convinced the villagers to honor the tale each year. They called it Hari Penjaga, the Day of the Guardian. They built lanterns shaped like dragons and released them into the sea at dusk. Children dressed as lizards. Elders told the story of the gray-haired woman and her wild friend. Music filled the air, blending sorrow and joy in perfect harmony. Each year, when the last lantern drifted beyond sight, a strange wind would rise from the forest. The villagers felt it brush their faces like a blessing. "They're here," they whispered, smiling through tears. The festival became more than memory. It became a promise renewed, that compassion could tame even the fiercest wild, and love could bind even death itself. One year, a man from the city attended the festival, a filmmaker seeking truth in myths. He watched the villagers release lanterns and saw tears glimmer in their eyes. Later that night, he visited the shrine alone, his camera trembling in his hands. When he played back his footage, a faint shadow appeared beside the banyan, a silhouette of a woman and a creature, fading in the wind. He released the film months later, titled The Komodo Who Stayed. It traveled far and wide, touching millions. People wept, wrote letters, and sent prayers. Donations came flooding to the village, helping them protect the forest. What began as one woman's act of kindness became a legacy that reached across oceans. And in every showing, viewers said they felt something watching from beyond the screen. Protected by love and legend, the island thrived. Komodos roamed freely again in the nearby forest, their numbers growing. Scientists studied them, villagers respected them, and harmony returned. One morning, Rani, now an elder, saw a young Komodo wander near the shrine. It paused at the graves, sniffed the air, then lay down, calm and still. The villagers gasped, but Rani only smiled. "Welcome home," she whispered. For her, it was no coincidence. The spirit of Raka had returned, not as a ghost, but as new life, as nature's way of remembering. The young dragon stayed for days, basking in the sunlight beside the shrine. The circle had closed, and the bond between human and beast had begun anew. In time, the story of Nenek and Raka became more than legend. It became a song sung by children at dusk. A woman kind and brave once fed the wild, they sang, and the wild stayed by her side. The melody carried across the fields, weaving through coconut trees and waves. Sailors claimed they could hear it even offshore, like the island itself was humming their love story. Elders said the song protected the land. When storms approached, they sang louder, and somehow the sea always calmed. Whether truth or magic, none dared question it. The bond between people, nature, and memory had become inseparable. Each heartbeat of the island carried their rhythm still. On the 50th anniversary of the Guardian's Day, the sky turned gold at dawn. Villagers gathered by the banyan tree, the air thick with incense and hope. Rani, now gray-haired like the woman before her, lit the final lantern and whispered, "For you who stayed." As it rose, the sun broke the horizon, spilling light over the graves, the forest, the sea. For a heartbeat, all sound faded. Then came a soft hiss, gentle, familiar, and the scent of rain, though the sky was clear. The villagers lifted their heads, smiling. They knew. Somewhere beyond sight, Nenek and Raka walked together again, as they always had. One human, one dragon, bound by love everlasting. And the island, forever breathing their memory, glowed with the warmth of an eternal morning. That night, after the 50th festival, Rani dreamed of the sea. She stood on the same shore where Nenek once walked, the waves glowing with moonlight. A vast shadow moved beneath the water, a dragon-shaped silhouette. Then came a familiar voice, soft as mist. "We never left." She turned and saw Nenek smiling, gray hair flowing like the tide. Beside her stood Raka, strong, radiant, eyes calm as ever. When she awoke, the scent of salt lingered in the air. The villagers said the sea had shimmered all night, even without moonlight. Some called it a miracle. Rani said nothing, only smiled with tears in her eyes. She understood now. Their story had become part of the ocean's pulse, the island's breath, the very rhythm of the earth. A new generation grew among the banyan roots. One boy, small and curious, often asked, "Did the dragon really love the old woman?" The elders would smile and answer, "Yes, child, and she loved him first." Each time he visited the shrine, the wind would shift slightly, as if greeting him. He would bow shyly, whispering, "Hello, Nenek." "Hello, Raka." The boy began to draw them, on stones, on wood, even in the sand. He imagined them walking together at sunset, their shadows stretching side by side. One day, he told his mother, "I'll make a book so the whole world remembers." And though he didn't know it yet, that small dream would keep their story alive for centuries to come. One dry summer, lightning struck again, this time setting the northern forest ablaze. Flames roared toward the village, devouring trees and nesting grounds. Panic spread, but the villagers refused to flee. "We will protect the guardian's home," they vowed. Men and women formed lines with buckets of water, while others prayed at the shrine. Smoke filled the air, but their faith held strong. Then, as the fire neared the banyan, the wind shifted. Dark clouds rolled in from the sea, bringing rain. Fierce, sudden, saving. The storm extinguished the blaze before it reached the graves. The people fell to their knees crying, "They still protect us." From that day on, the villagers began calling the banyan Pohonjiwa, the tree of souls. Under its shade, no harm ever came again. Years later, the boy who once drew in the sand grew into a writer. He traveled far, collecting stories about human bonds with nature. But no tale touched him like his own, the story of Nenek and Raka. When he finally returned to the island, he carried a manuscript bound in leather. Its title, "The Komodo Who Stayed." He read it aloud beneath the banyan, his voice trembling with love. The villagers wept as he spoke of kindness stronger than fear, of wildness softened by devotion. When the book was published, it spread across nations, translated into many tongues. People everywhere spoke of the gray-haired woman and her dragon who defied nature's divide. And in every telling, the wind seemed to hum softly, as if approving the truth in every word. Because of the book, travelers began to visit the island not as tourists, but as pilgrims. They came to learn, to plant trees, to heal. Schools taught children to care for animals, to protect the forests, to see the divine in the living world. The villagers built a small sanctuary for Komodos nearby, safe, open, and sacred. They called it Rumah Raka. One morning, as the sun rose, a Komodo mother laid her eggs near the banyan roots. The villagers took it as a blessing. "He has returned again," they whispered, smiling. The cycle of guardianship continued, old giving way to new, yet the same love flowing beneath. The island had become what Nenek once dreamed of, a home where people and the wild could live as one. One evening, a woman from another land arrived at the shrine. She was a scientist studying Komodos, her heart grounded in data, not myth. But when she stood beneath the banyan, her instruments failed. No signal, no noise, only silence. Then she felt it. Warmth, gentle and immense, wrapping around her like invisible arms. She knelt without knowing why, tears falling freely. Later she wrote in her journal, "I came for knowledge, but found reverence." Some truths are not measured, they're felt. She left behind her notebook as an offering, its final page blank. The villagers said that night, the forest glowed faintly blue, as if starlight had descended to bless the roots of the tree of souls. Time moved on. Rani passed peacefully one morning, sitting before the shrine with a smile on her lips. When the villagers found her, the wind was still, the birds quiet. They buried her beside her ancestors, near Nenek and Raka, completing the circle. The banyan's branches stretched wider that year, its leaves shining brighter, as though absorbing her spirit too. The island mourned, but it did not despair, because they knew every act of care, every whispered prayer, every breath of wind carried their presence onward. The world might forget names, but love never vanished. It only changed form, becoming sky, sea, and song. Years later, As the world grew faster and louder, the story of Nenek and Raka remained a quiet beacon. Children learned it in school, artists painted it, musicians turned it into symphonies. The island thrived as a sanctuary of peace. Travelers who came restless found calm. Those who came wounded found healing. The villagers said it was the guardian's gift. On one particular morning, a little girl found a small Komodo hatchling sunbathing near the shrine. She lifted it gently, smiling, and whispered, "You're safe here." Her grandmother watched and felt tears rise, because in that moment, she saw the entire story repeating, beautifully, eternally. That night, the villagers held a lantern ceremony once more. Thousands of lights floated on the sea, each representing a wish, a memory, a prayer. The sky mirrored the water, so it looked as though heaven itself had descended to the ocean's edge. The villagers sang softly, the same lullaby Nenek once hummed. Their voices blended with the wind, with the waves, with the distant call of Komodos echoing through the cliffs. As the final lantern drifted beyond sight, the banyan leaves shimmered faintly gold. Two faint silhouettes appeared within the light, one human, one reptile, walking side by side into the sea of stars. The people did not fear. They only bowed their heads and whispered, "Thank you for staying." Now, generations later, travelers still come to that quiet island. They walk the old paths, breathe the salt air, and find the banyan tree still standing strong. Beneath its roots lie three resting souls, woman, dragon, and the line of guardians who followed. The air hums softly, carrying a story older than time. Those who listen carefully can still hear a lullaby in the wind, and when dawn breaks, the sun always seems a little warmer there. Locals say it's because love itself never left. It became light. The Komodo who stayed still lives, not in flesh, but in memory, in faith, in every heart that dares to love without condition. And somewhere beyond the veil of morning, Nenek and Raka walk together still, forever guardians, forever home,